What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Unexpected Points. Coming a day later than usual here. The reason for that is once we get into this point in the season, there's a little bit less to talk about when it comes to misperceptions, ideas of team rankings, ideas of like MVP, who should be MVP, who shouldn't be MVP, even though we're getting a lot of stat stuff flying out there this week that I'm going to want to address and discuss. It's more marginal moves off of a pretty large base of evidence that we're getting in this part of the season than, brand new evidence that's coming in that's going to really move us off of our priors for what we were thinking before, or maybe new evidence coming in that's moving people in a recency bias sort of way that isn't appropriate. There's some of that now. There's some of that going on now. But even now, I think people are less likely to get fooled by, let's say, a couple of weeks of performance in one direction or another coming on the back of 10 plus weeks before that than they were a couple of weeks of bad performance coming in on the back of 5 or 6 or 7 weeks of performance. Just the way that it ends up being. But we got some news. That's kind of what I was hoping for. By not going at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, maybe with President Trump back in office, we'll just we won't have to differentiate between Standard Time and Daylight Savings Time anymore. He can drop me some questions about that if you want to know my theories. So rather than talking on a Tuesday afternoon at 1 p.m., Tuesday night, some news dropped. Some news that was I was expecting to hear this week before we even got the rumblings. And of course, okay, I'll just say it right out. The news is, Penix in, Michael Penix in, Kirk Cousins out in Atlanta. He got the nail in the coffin, I believe, earlier this week from head coach Raheem Morris, where he said, we're evaluating or something like that when it comes to quarterback. Yeah, whenever they say we're evaluating, I have to watch the tape. I have to watch the tape when we're talking about the potential for a quarterback change. When you hear that stuff, when you hear all positions are being evaluated, they throw that out as if it's not really like the quarterback that matters here versus the other positions. They say every position is being evaluated. When you hear those three things, it's he gone. Okay, starting quarterback is toast, because even if they give the dreaded vote of confidence to the starting quarterback, you still have probably depending upon how they're playing, a 10 to 20% chance that he gone too. Even if they say, no, we're not making a move on, Sunday post game, there's still some chance of him being gone. So once you get into we're evaluating, we're watching tape, we're thinking about it, then, it's a done deal. Per usual, I'll say, I'll give myself, as the gratuitous self-congratulation, which is part of the theme of this podcast. Of course, on Monday night, I talked about the possibility on my Monday Night Football advanced reviews, which you get at unexpectedpoints.com. Go over there. That's where, it's where I try to pay the bills with some people signing up over there. I mean, I'll go ahead and bring it up. Of course, I mentioned it last week that here's what I said, because they did win the game, right? The Falcons did win the game, but I said ultimately wins and losses are the biggest factor keeping teams from switching at quarterback, but Cousins is going to test that theory with this performance. Yeah, he was testing it, whether a win was going to be enough. Even the floor outcome for switching to rookie Michael Penix can't be much worse than what Cousins provided last night. Right. And why was that the case for this particular game? Well, Cousins was bad. I mean, he lost about a third of an expected point per play, and they didn't even use him. Right. So they didn't even use him. If you go to, and I bring up different numbers here. So one of the numbers that I bring up for the game is I'm looking at the wrong game here. Is the passing So passing away, so the Falcons the away team, it was negative 20.8. That means they were 20% under expectation in their pass rate in this game. They ran it 38% of the time. You would have expected based upon score differential, down, distance, all the different plays. You wrap up everything on each and every play. You try to figure out the probability of a run or pass. You aggregate that all up. You look at it versus actual run versus pass. You would have expected around a 58, 59% pass rate, which is below average because of the fact that they were winning most of the game. But they were 20% below expectation. So, like, if the idea was we're scared of putting the rookie in because he can make a bunch of mistakes, you're not even giving him a chance to make that many mistakes. You weren't even giving Cousins a chance to make that many mistakes, and he still made mistakes, even though he wasn't getting a chance to make mistakes. So, like, with the offense they were running, it was pretty obvious. You gotta think of doing something. And if you go back even further, again, as part of my weekly reviews, if you go back even further here and try and figure out what I was saying the week before, and this is where I think the value comes from. Now, here we go. Against the Vikings, this is where the value comes when you sign up for the newsletter. Sometimes you're getting the news multiple weeks in advance here. Let's look at Penix here. What did I say about it this week for Cousins? I said it was another mistake-prone affair for Kirk Cousins. This is against the Vikings. With the Falcons' playoff chances dipping below 50 cents, it might only take one more week before they turn to Michael Penix. Ding! It took one more week before they turned to Michael Penix in a bid to salvage their season and get a head start of turning the page at quarterback. So again, I said it would take probably one more week before you go to Penix. They even won the game against the Raiders, but it was so bad. It was so bad from a performance / just what they were asking him to do, perspective, that they still turned the page. Again, this is not just like we want to see what the rookie can do. They probably legitimately think at this point that he gives them a better chance of making the playoffs. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but he definitely gives them more upside for making the playoffs. I mean, for going further, making the playoffs and then going further. Okay, so that's done. So we got the news. So I have a lot to talk about today. I'm going to make this somewhat similar to the last couple of podcasts, where at the risk of being annoying and maybe a little bit insufferable, talking about these larger points and kind of broad thematic ways of viewing decisions and thinking about narratives and all that stuff, at the risk of doing that, that's kind of what I'm going to do when looking at this decision, is not focus too much on the particulars. I think we can get lost in the analysis here of the particulars of this situation. This happens a lot when you talk thematically about different situations and what you've learned from them and how they apply to this situation. Almost always the objection will be, well, that situation isn't exactly the same as this situation. It never is. For instance, I was trying to bring up the Jalen Hurts and Carson Wentz situation, which I wrote about. I think there are a lot of thematic similarities there, about having multiple options that you're getting at quarterback without knowing that you're kind of turning the page on one versus the other, increasing your total probability of finding the right quarterback in the short term and, in the medium term when it came to Wentz and Hurts. And no matter how it played out, you were going to have a loss in one way or another. You're either going to have Carson Wentz that you signed a big contract to, that you're going to have to trade and take a lot of dead money hit, or you're going to have a loss and you're going to have a draft pick in Jalen Hurts that doesn't do anything. So thematically, a lot of similarities. Now, of course, the first response I get back when I mention that it's similar is, oh, but those situations were different. Hurts was the 53rd pick, and this was the 8th pick, and this was that, and this that. Yes, no two situations are exactly the same. Right? You always have an objection. You always have a built-in objection to any evidence that you're going to present, historical evidence you're going to present to try to show similarity, because it's not the same thing. History is not exactly repeating itself. The famous Mark Twain quote, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, right? So yeah, these are rhyming a bit here. These are not the same exact situations. But when you're thinking about this, I think broader picture, whether it's looking at the Wentz Hurts thing, whether it's looking at a bunch of the Jordan Love pick when Aaron Rodgers was there, whether you're looking at I don't know. There's a bunch of different situations, bringing in Steve Young versus Joe Montana in the past, bringing in Patrick Mahomes versus Alex Smith was playing, which remember at kind of like an MVP adjacent level at that point in time. They're all different. They're all different sort of situations, but there's all thematic things that are similar. So I'm going to talk about some of these thematic issues, which can then apply to the Penix Cousins situation. But first, now I'm going to back up even further here, be even more annoying, back up even further here and say, let's focus on two key concepts when we're approaching analyzing a decision. So news comes across the wire, Adam Schefter just got he's just copying and pasting, what he's getting from an agent. As part of his quid pro quo with all the different agents out there. He's copying and pasting, Falcons are drafting Michael Penix, or we see the pick come across for Michael Penix. Everyone has the reactions. Boom, reactions come out immediately. So what do we need to do when we're thinking about this? We're thinking about how we formulate the correct, in my opinion, or the least worst, or the best or least worst assessment of a particular decision. Well, it's two different things. One, we want to use first principles thinking. You guys may be aware of this concept, first principles thinking. It's more of a scientific sort of thing when you're thinking about it, but it can apply to anything, where it basically says you want to deconstruct something and analyze it from the ground up rather than have all these assumptions built in and then layer your analysis on top of all these assumptions that we're not exactly sure apply. Number one, we're not sure these assumptions apply to the current situation. Number two, even if they do apply, there are differences in the situation. Number three, some of these assumptions are just straight up wrong, and we just assume that they're true. My favorite being like, you can't develop two quarterbacks at the same time. I mean, I can point to you a dozen examples of two quarterbacks on a team who were, one was developed while they were a backup. You can't develop a backup is kind of what it comes down to. But that gets thrown out there constantly, even though it's like not only is it questionable, but it's like disproven by tons of evidence, and it still kind of lives on forever. So that's the first thing. Want to build up first principles thinking. The second thing is we want to make sure we're thinking probabilistically. Probabilistic thinking. We want to look at it. We don't want to say, okay, X is going to happen, and then Y is going to happen. So why are we doing Y when X happening? We don't need Y when X happens. Well, the reality is there's a percentage chance that X will happen, and then there's another percentage chance that X won't happen, and there's a percentage chance Y will happen, and there's a percentage chance that it won't happen, and there are other outcomes that come into it. Now, we're going to be wrong about our assumptions. Again, even our mental models here, or our actual programmatic models, all of them are wrong, but some are useful, right? So probabilistic thinking, though, is extremely useful because it's grounded in more reality than binary thinking is when we're assessing these different situations. Okay, so those are the two things. And then when it comes into it, if we're thinking probabilistically and we're thinking from first principles, if we're doing those, we have those two things in our head when we're assessing these situations, we're going to have better assumptions, more realistic assumptions, more comprehensive assumptions. More assumptions that are more applicable to the current situation, assumptions that will increase our predictive ability, essentially, because that's all we're trying to do, right? We're trying to predict what's going to happen most of the time. And predictions are hard. As Yogi Berra says, predictions are hard, especially about the future, right? So those are two things. And I think there's just a lot of bad assumptions that are getting thrown into this particular situation when it comes to Penix. And there were a lot of bad assumptions that come down to it. Okay. Okay. This is again, I got to kind of wrap all these things up. So let's start with first principles and looking at this discussion. So the first thing we need to do is not layer on bad assumptions before we even start thinking about the decision. So what are in my opinion, bad assumptions that we have here? There are many. The number one assumption I'll think of I can go even deeper down into the layers and peel the onion back a bit further, but we're going to start here, is the idea that, and this is one of the common critiques of this, that if the Falcons knew, or not even if, this would just be assumption, right? So let's just say the Falcons knew that they wanted to draft a quarterback in the draft. They wanted to draft Michael Penix, let's say, in the draft. They had the number 8 pick in the draft. Why would you sign Cousins knowing you were going to do that? Okay, if you knew you were going to do that, then it's wasteful to sign Cousins. Okay. Even if you did know you're going to do that, I'm not sure it's wasteful to sign Cousins, but that's more, again, I'm getting back to the first principles sort of thinking and probabilistic stuff there. But looking specifically at this assumption, I think it's flawed in multiple ways. Okay. As someone who has some window through knowing people in NFL front offices, someone who has read many after the fact oral history of different decisions that were being made, someone who knows how the hierarchy plays into major NFL decisions where ownership is a big part of it. That even if the Falcons, when they were negotiating with Kirk Cousins, just remember, there's like the legal tampering period and the everything else. So it was basically, I think March 11th was the date where it was announced at the beginning of the legal tampering period that Kirk Cousins was going to come to the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, probably there was something going on before that, right? So now we're getting into February. We're getting into 2 full months before the NFL draft happens. Okay. So saying that they knew that they were going to want Michael Penix at that point in time, I think is a vast overstatement, because even if Raheem Morris, and let's remember Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot, I almost forgot the GM's name there. Sorry about that. Knew that they wanted this kid. They knew badly that they wanted this kid. They don't have organizational sign off on making this pick. When you draft a quarterback at number 8 overall, you need organizational sign off on this, 100% organizational sign off on this. This is not a situation where you have the number 1 overall pick and you know who's going to be there and you can kind of put all that stuff down in ink, cross all your T's, dot your I's, have everyone signed off and ready to go. Maybe even before the last game of the NFL season, or at least right when the players declare for the NFL draft, that maybe the number 2 pick in certain situations where you have like Zach Wilson or someone like that, we can kind of know. Beyond that, when you're introducing a lot of uncertainty as to how the draft will play out, when you don't know a ton about these guys, they're not just, rubber stamping these guys as number 1 or number 2 picks overall for quarterback. Because the quarterback pick has such a huge impact on the organization and they're the face of the franchise, everything like this, you need organizational certainty, have a solid organizational sign off on a pick. That very often does not happen 2.5 months in advance of the draft, or 2 months in advance of the draft, and often not even 1 month in advance of the draft, maybe not even 2 weeks in advance of the draft. Let's think about what happened with Trey Lance, right? And whatever was going on there in San Francisco. Even if Fontenot and Morris got the inklings that they liked Michael Penix and maybe they wanted to sign them, that is far away from knowing they're going to have 100% organizational green light on April 25th. I think it was April 25th. to draft him, number 8 overall. Assuming that he's there. Now that's another assumption we're going to talk about in a little while. So I think that's a bad assumption. No matter how much they liked him, getting organizational sign-off on a franchise quarterback doesn't happen that far in advance unless you're sure you're going to have them. There's a lot of conversations that are going to have to take place. There's a lot of comfortability that's going to have to happen. There's a lot of vetting that's going to have to happen. All these different things have to happen in advance. Okay, so that's the first thing. Bad assumption. Another bad assumption, that he'll be there at the number 8 pick for sure. That's what everyone was assuming. Now, I'll give it to you. There's a pretty high likelihood that he'll be there at the number 8 pick. That was true. But what's the likelihood that he won't be there? It's something, right? It's not non-existent. This is not having the number 1 pick. This is not having the number 2 pick where you know who the number 1 pick is going to be. Again, the Zach Wilson sort of situation. This is having the number 8 pick in a draft where you know there are a lot of teams that are a little bit behind you, a couple picks behind you, 4 picks behind you, 5 picks behind you, 3 picks behind you, that may want to move up too. There's some teams with picks ahead of you. They're going to want to draft some quarterbacks. Now, you don't think it's going to be Michael Penix. No one is mock drafting it to be Penix, but it's a non-zero chance that someone moves up above you to take him. Because let's remember, part of the evidence that you're bringing in to weigh this, to weigh how likely it is that someone will take him. If you're saying, oh, there's no chance someone would take them earlier than the 8th pick overall, he wasn't that type of prospect. Well, I mean, you want to take him 8th overall, right? You've seen a lot of evidence that presumably mock drafters and others and whoever haven't seen. And you've decided this guy's a great pick at 8 overall. Is this exclusive information that you're getting that no one else is privy to? No. Other guys are vetting the same quarterback. Other guys maybe just as impressed as you are at that point in time. So if you're eventually getting to the point where you're rock solid, locked in on Michael Penix being a great pick at 8th overall, it would be foolish to think no one else could get to that same decision, right? You don't know what's going on other than through the rumor mill, what other people are saying. I mean, I know for a fact, and we've seen this, there's been a billion stories about Sean Payton and the Saints and how he wanted Patrick Mahomes, and then, the Chiefs leapfrogged them and jumped up and got him at number 10. It's my recollection, I could be wrong about this, but it's my recollection that Patrick Mahomes was pretty much exclusively being mock drafted in the early second round / 20s, maybe in the first round. Maybe he was getting to the teens, in some mock drafts. I don't think anyone had him in the top 10 pick. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. These mock drafts are like way behind the curve, right? For how things are actually moving in the NFL. I don't think anyone had him that high. I mean, I know, we know very well the Saints and Sean Payton wanted him. I pretty much know for a fact. Well, actually, I shouldn't say this. I don't know for a fact. I have heavy suspicion, confirmed with some evidence, that the Browns may have wanted him a couple of picks after where he ended up going in the NFL draft. So there were teams where if the Chiefs didn't jump up and take Patrick Mahomes at number 10, if the Saints would have gotten him or the Browns would have gotten him, after the fact, we would have said, oh, well, of course, the Saints knew they were going to get him because no one was drafting Patrick Mahomes in the top 10. That wasn't going to happen. Well, the absence of something happening isn't the absence of the possibility of something happening. It's very easy after the fact to say that. So that's another poor assumption that's going into that. That's going into that situation. And the last kind of poor-ish assumption, I don't know if it's that poor of an assumption, but a poor-ish assumption was probably, and this goes into the probabilistic thinking, is the binary way of looking at these guys, right? Like you draft You sign Kirk Cousins and then you get a Kirk Cousins performance, and nothing, that's a singular sort of thing. So you know what you're going to get there. So then if you're paying all this money to get this, why are you then drafting a quarterback also? Because you're already getting this. Well, the fact that you're getting this, I mean, beyond the obvious things about him coming off of an Achilles tear and being in aging and all those sorts of things, beyond those obvious critiques of knowing what you're going to get with Kirk Cousins, there's a critique of there's going to be a lot of variable to any quarterback, variation to any quarterback you're going to get, how good they're going to be when they're going to hit the age cliff, how they're going to recover from injury. They could go through a 2-year run where they're playing like a top 10 quarterback again when it comes to Kirk Cousins, or they could go through a 2-year run where they're outside of the top 20 pretty easily without the injury, right? So there's no binary out. There's no binary. Yes, we have Kirk Cousins. No, we don't have Kirk Cousins there. So once you've kind of laid aside these poor assumptions, then you have to start thinking about the broad thing probabilistically. And just to give an example, and again, this is not the same thing. So you can say, oh, it's not the same situation, but let's say it's a similar-ish sort of situation that we can fold into this. And we can play out probabilistically what could happen if you don't make the decisions that you have. If you come around and you try to play this differently, okay? Again, I'm saying you don't have organizational sign-off. You don't know for sure that Michael Penix is going to be there. Those things are true, but you're like, well, you know what? We're a risk-taking organization. So we're not going to sign a credible starting quarterback who could have a top 10 season, really. And even though we have this roster that's good enough kind of around, and look at this roster, like you're getting bad quarterback play right now and they're 7-7, right? The roster. Even though we have this roster that's good enough to not only make the playoffs, but maybe make a little bit of a run in the playoffs if we get top 10 quarterback play, to make the playoffs if we get average quarterback play. Even though we have this, we're risk takers in this organization. Much easier to say on the outside than on the inside. We're risk takers in this organization, and we're going to do what the Raiders did instead of what the Falcons did. No, the Raiders aren't even good, like outside of quarterback, really. So it's kind of a different situation. There's more risk for the Falcons not signing someone in free agency than there is for the Raiders. But I'll use the Raiders as the example. You'll say, well, we'll sign Gardner Minshew. Okay, he's kind of like we're not making a big commitment. We're not launching a lot of guaranteed money. We're not doing all these things. And we're getting probably better quarterback play than we got from Desmond Ridder. Maybe in some scenarios we can scrape into the playoffs, but that's about it. And then we're gonna hope that Penix is there. Now, if you think about the Raiders, right? They got Minshew, and then they got nobody in the draft. What has this season been for them? Now, again, they had lower downside, less to lose because their roster stinks, and they can maybe just grind out a year and have a high draft pick for next year. But they might have wanted to think about getting a quarterback. I mean, everyone loves Brock Bowers now, so maybe people are like, "Oh, it's great they didn't get a quarterback; they got Brock Bowers." I mean, I think we see. Look at their win-loss record. We'll see. We see what that means. But you got nothing, and then you're starting from scratch next year. It's a waste. It's a lost season, right? You got guys like Max Crosby, where if you're going to say edge rusher is the second most important position in the NFL, there's an argument for that. You got a guy playing at the top of his game, a prime year, flush it down the toilet. Okay? Nothing from it. Talking about trading him mid-season, right? Rather than keeping him. I mean, there are organizational downsides to this, especially when we're talking about these guys like, Fontenot's a couple of years, right, into what he's doing. Actually, did I get it wrong? Did Fontenot, was Fontenot fired? Actually, Fontenot was fired. Was he fired? Let me see. Let me check this. I can't believe I don't know this. I should know this. Before I start talking about, oh, he is general manager. Okay, good. I thought I was talking about a guy that wasn't even there anymore. So there's a little bit more risk to doing that when we're talking about the Falcons. But you could end up in a Raiders type scenario. Like that scenario exists, people. Okay? When you're probabilistically thinking, if you don't sign Kirk Cousins, there's nothing else out there. There's not like a ton of great options out there. You could be looking at they already had Marcus Mariota, right? Can't bring him back, probably. You're looking at a Gardner Minshew, and then you miss out on quarterback in the draft, and then that's your season. I mean, that's everybody's getting fired. That's burning prime seasons of big contracts or big draft picks all over the place on that team. That is a possibility, right? So sometimes avoiding catastrophic outcomes is worth locking yourself into a situation where you're going to lose some of your capital, or whether it's draft capital or cap money capital. That's okay to lose some of that to avoid that catastrophic outcome. So you have that for the probabilistic. Then you have the again, which is all based upon the fact that you might not get Penix, which is a bad assumption. So, but even if you say we're going to get both of these guys, okay, even if you step back and say we're going to get Cousins and we're going to get Penix, well, guess what? There are some situations which we're seeing now that Cousins doesn't play at a level that you were hoping him to, and you need someone else to step in and be better. There are some situations where the draft pick, Penix, doesn't work out and he busts. Now, there are more circumstances under which Penix gives you the upside, and that's what we're really stretching for, and that's why I don't really critique quarterback draft picks. But again, they both have these ranges of outcomes, a little bit more narrow range of outcomes for Cousins than we have for Penix. But they both have ranges of outcomes, right? The only scenario in which you say this was really kind of a bad, and I say quote unquote bad move, is if they both hit, right? Like if Cousins is playing out of his mind and Penix is a great draft pick, then there's some like actual opportunity cost waste in that situation, right? There's a quarterback who's not on the field who could be adding a lot of value in those sort of situations. If one of them's good and the other one's bad, then you just did the perfect thing by doubling up and by expanding the range of outcomes, the probabilistic way that you can hit on one of these two guys. And then if neither one of them hit, well, it's probably good that you took chances, right? You took shots. People are gonna roast you about it afterwards, but at the very least, you were trying. It doesn't always work, but you're trying to do things rather than just being satisfied with one quarterback. So we shouldn't view the quarterback position as a box checking exercise where, and this is the Carson Wentz thing. I mean, if you have Mahomes, I get it. If you have Lamar Jackson, I get it. If you have Josh Allen, I get it. You can check those boxes. But when you have these guys where, like a Baker Mayfield right now, Carson Wentz before with the Eagles, before the Jalen Hurts pick, maybe a Geno Smith right now, some other mid-ish sort of guys, you don't know what you're going to get. We think we know. We're like, got that starting quarterback position filled. And then literally halfway through the next season, we could be like, oh my God, we got to get rid of this guy. And then we flipped over to the other end of the binary spectrum. The reality is you have different outcomes for each of these guys that we can reasonably expect. So we're trying to maximize our probability of hitting on one of them. It guarantees that we're going to have more waste than if we just picked the right one. Like if we had a crystal ball, we knew Cousins was going to be better than Penix for the next few years, or Penix is going to be better than Cousins for the last few years. Then you pick one versus the other, and you're going to benefit more so than if you had both of them. But the problem is we don't have that, right? We don't have that. So by getting both of them, you're maximizing the total chance that at least one of them hits. And if only one of them hits, you should be very happy because you had that extra player who stepped in, and you could have picked the one that didn't hit. If both of them hit, you should be pretty happy because you could probably trade one of them versus the other for something that works out pretty well. And if your downside here is to say you lost money on Kirk Cousins, I just think we're being too highly focused on the short-term benefits of saying if we had an extra, you know, I don't know. I guess it's going to be like 40-ish sort of million cap hit next year that you're going to have to eat versus not eating it. I'm not really going to look at this year that much. If you want to do the whole 100 million, you can do that. Let's say 40 million next year, you're going to have to roll over, part of that 20 million for the year after that. Yeah, that hurts, but you have a cheap quarterback, and it's really about the quarterback play more than anything else. People are too focused on having an extra $20 million, the rookie quarterback savings, all these sorts of things. It's about hitting on quarterback. I know we had this whole stretch for like a decade where we had all these rookie quarterback contracts and guys getting into the Super Bowl on their rookie quarterback contracts. Well, normally they were also playing very well. It wasn't just the rookie quarterbacks. It wasn't that they were on a rookie quarterback contract. They were a mediocre quarterback, and then they used an additional $20 million to sign a linebacker. That wasn't what was getting them to the Super Bowl. It was that they were actually playing well also. Jalen Hurts made it to the Super Bowl on a rookie quarterback contract. Well, he was also second in MVP voting that year. It wasn't like he was just meh. And then that savings that they got from the rookie quarterback contract was getting him something else. There's a lot more to that. So big picture, when we look at these things, don't just react. Start from the beginning. Question our assumptions. Why do we have the assumptions that we do about what they should have known, when they should have known, how they should have known if they could draft someone or not? And think probabilistically. Think about the downsides in particular of missing out on everyone, missing out on everything, which exists. After the fact, we could say, oh, you definitely would have gotten Penix, but before the fact, what are we trying to do? And lastly, don't lose out on the best decision when reaching for the perfect decision. Again, the perfect decision would be either signing Cousins and not drafting Penix because Penix is bad, because Penix is bad. So then that would have been the perfect decision between the two. Or not signing Cousins and drafting Penix because you knew Cousins was going to be bad and Penix was going to be good and be a great franchise quarterback. That's better than getting both of them, right? There's always going to be like one part of the equation that goes down. But that doesn't mean there's the best decision overall. A little bit of quote unquote waste, if you want to call it that, whether you're wasting cap dollars, whether you're wasting draft capital in a way, it's only a waste after the fact. It's only a post hoc sort of rationalization of it being a waste. And it's not a waste when you're using your opportunities to get that high level quarterback play, which is really going to drive performance. So if you can increase your chances of getting that materially, even if that also locks in the likelihood you're going to have wasted either draft capital or actual salary cap capital, that's fine. That's good. That's the right way to go because the quarterback is that important. Pouring more and more resources into that position is great, is fine. If we have some waste there, it's okay because the upside is that high, because it is worth so much. This might not be the best analogy, but if you think about another like onesie type of position, because I think that's what drives this, right? You can only start one quarterback at a time. So another onesie sort of position, like a running back or something. It's not really a onesie position, but you're thinking about it. If you'd say, oh, we signed like this mid-tier veteran at running back, and now we're drafting one in the third round. No one's going crazy about that because they realize, hey, this first guy could bust. The second guy could be good. I probably wouldn't like it, honestly, because of the low downside. And then you can say, well, it's not the same. One's drafting the guy number 8 overall versus a third round pick. And one is giving a guy 100 million guaranteed versus, 20, 30 million guaranteed that you're giving for a free agent in running back, maybe only 20 million guaranteed. They're giving for a free agent running back, maybe only 10 million guaranteed. But the upside is so much greater at quarterback We got to always be thinking about that upside. How do we get there? Not how do we get there quickly? How do we get there using all of our opportunities that we have right now to get there? Especially if you're talking about the Falcons and a good roster around it. That's what they were doing. That's why we shouldn't critique it so much. That's why, in all honesty, at the end of the day, we can't be that worried about the money that's going to be lost on this, because Penix, and some people don't like him as a prospect. That's probably another really bad assumption that goes into this. They're saying, oh, well, I know that he's not really worth that pick. We don't know anything, guys. A lot of people thought Jaden Daniels was not worth the number 2 pick, and look how good that he is. Multiple podcasts I listened to in the offseason where they were like ranking best quarterbacks in the NFL went or guys that they would want to have for the next 3 years, went Caleb Williams and then Drake May, and kind of just left Jaden Daniels out of that. We don't know anything when it comes to these things, and Michael Penix could definitely be that guy. Another bad assumption. So anyway, first principles thinking, probabilistic thinking. All right. That was exhausting, even rant on my part for me. Again, if you guys want to drop any questions or whatever into the comments, let me know, and I can expand upon anything questions you have about this sort of stuff. And if not, then not. A couple other things I saw. Recently we're talking about MVP talk. The Lamar Jackson stats are becoming the talk of the town now. I've seen multiple graphics come out showing Lamar Jackson having more passing yards and more rushing yards than Josh Allen, and a higher completion percentage and a higher passer rating and everything else. And that's why he deserves to have the MVP award, or Joe Burrow has the bigger counting stats and this and that. I mean, whatever. You can make reasonable arguments for other sorts of guys, but I think it just shows you that I'm going to assume, I don't know for a fact because I can't say this for everyone, but I'm going to assume that when you see, Ravens backer 420-69 sharing these stats and saying, oh, this is why Lamar Jackson deserves to be MVP. What were they saying a year ago when the stats weren't there at all? Well, they were probably saying, oh, well, he's the best player on the best team, or he's a unique guy, and stats don't capture what he does. I guess stats are capturing what he does this year, but they didn't capture what he did last year somehow. Stats capture what he did in 2019, but they don't capture what he did last year somehow. So what I would pay close to special attention to is a consistency that people have, which shows their sincerity in their analysis. So, like I did a whole write-up last year where I think I said I put Dak Prescott as MVP, but it was close between him and Purdy and Josh Allen, and then maybe throw in Lamar Jackson. It's close between those guys. But that's what I did. But I tried to look through it in a systematic way, and I'm looking at the stats, and I'm doing adjustments to EPA, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, if we give Lamar a little bit extra credit for the rushing game because of what he brings, how does that work? But Josh Allen probably deserves some of that too. And I had a methodology, right? It wasn't, as I saw from some people who claim to be serious analysts, that would say, well, he's the best player on the best team, or he's a unique talent. So that's it. Like that's their rationale. He's so unique. You can't measure what he does in stats. So when you have people switching from saying that to now pointing at the stats, and not only pointing at the stats, but pointing at stats that don't do a great job of actually having a valuation of the player, where you're pulling things from passing yards and rushing yards and passing touchdowns and rushing touchdowns without context, and you're ignoring fumbles, which Lamar Jackson, unfortunately for him, has a lot of this season, and you're only looking at interceptions. You're not looking at what are were they bad interceptions? Were they, arm punts that didn't really cost that much? The rushing yards, Josh Allen's doing a lot of third and fourth down short yardage conversions, which are highly valuable, versus not doing that, you're not getting, we have EPA there. And I know people hate EPA, but we have it because it brings all of that together into the best valuation metric. Because this whole thing, EPA is a team stat. I got that again this week. Everyone's always saying that. All these other stats are team stats. Passing yards is a team stat. If you say a player got 15 passing yards and a first down and a touchdown on a play versus saying on 2nd and 5 versus saying those yards and the touchdown and the first down. First downs actually don't come in. People probably should talk about that more often. Let's say rather than just looking at the yards and the touchdown, if you were to say they added 3.3 EPA on the play, it's the same thing. Two different ways of valuing what happened on a play, which is a team matriculating the ball down the field or losing yards. It's the same thing. There is no difference. This whole EPA as a team stat has become the weirdest. And again, let's think about it in first principles, right? This is first principles thinking. First principles thinking is, why is EPA any different than any of these other stats that that you would quote? Why is it more of a team stat than any of these other things? Once you actually think about it, it's not. There's no difference between that. Those others may be more descriptive of what happened, right? They may say, oh, a yard was gained. There was a turnover. So we're measuring the components, but if a quarterback gets intercepted and we say the EPA on that is -4 versus everyone working together on the offense, trying to move the ball down the field, the quarterback throws it, it gets intercepted. Well, versus saying there's one interception in a normal box score stat. Well, guess what? Everyone's working together, trying to move down the field. The quarterback throws it, different things happening with the receivers. Like, everyone's involved in that play too. Everyone's involved in the interception also. The defense also is part of this, right? There's no like contextual sort of differences in that, other than EPA is measuring this more accurately for the actual value in points that are being added. And you can combine the rushing and the passing together to one measure rather than listing 17 things and saying, oh, Josh Allen is better on only 2 of the 8 stats that I happen to put up there. Many of these stats kind of measuring the same thing, like completion percentage and passer rating and this and that, where they're all kind of like jumbled up and combining the same thing together. So anyway, if you're going to be a good analyst, have to have consistency. Don't quote PFF grades when they match your take and then say PFF grades are garbage when they don't match your take. Don't quote EPA when it matches your take and then say EPA is a team stat when it doesn't match your take. Don't quote all these other stats when you said stats don't capture what's going on in the field when those stats back who your guy is for this. That's all I ask. That's all I ask. There are reasonable discussions to be had, but let's at least have the appearance of consistency and sincerity when we're doing this rather than starting from scratch. All right, let me take some questions to get out of here. I guess the power rankings, who's mad at me? Power rankings. Eagles fans are mad at me power rankings wise. Sorry guys. Well, I'll think about that. The one thing with the Eagles and the power rankings is I think they're up to being the best defense in my numbers versus like a great but not elite offense. What people have to realize is like predictive measures. You would rather have a top offense, elite offense, and maybe even a below average defense than a top defense and a slightly above average offense. It's just kind of the way it works because it's more predictive that the offense is going to be better going forward. So that's why people don't kind of understand the Rams and the Eagles. How could it be possible that I'm not the Rams, the Ravens and the Eagles? How can it be possible I have the Ravens above the Eagles? Well, first of all, it's ever so slight. Second, the Eagles are probably actually a little bit better because they were missing some players earlier this year, and that's part of the not fully captured in the model and this and that. But even so, just saying that they're roughly equal, that's what it's because of. We got more confidence in the Rams. Why do I keep saying Rams? In the Ravens offense than we do in the Eagles defense really being great. All right, let's grab some of these questions and get the hell out of here. Conehead here says, I'm so excited for this move. Talking about Penix here. Hopefully Penix plays well so people more seriously consider drafting rookie quarterbacks, even with an established vet on the roster. I agree. But again, we've seen this Mahomes, we've seen this Hurts, we've seen this other places. People still just have the same gut reaction. It's amazing to me. Same people who are yelling at me about writing up, the Seminole. If you guys want to look something up, I don't know if I can put links into the replies, but if you guys just go to PFF and type in Kevin Cole and Jalen Hurts. Probably my, my number one article here. I'll bring it up for Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts wasn't a good pick by the Philadelphia Eagles. He was a great one. You can just apply a lot of this stuff to whatever we're talking about when doubling up at quarterback. I mean, I'll bring kind of the big thing here where it kind of says, okay, here's our probabilities of these different types of outcomes. So how much does our total probability go up of having a top 6 quarterback or a top 12 quarterback by doubling up rather than just sticking with one of them? Again, probabilistic thinking. Shouldn't be that hard, but is quite hard for some people. Another question from Conad here. Has this been one of the most boring seasons in recent memory? I feel like there are maybe 3 exciting teams: Ravens, Bills, Lions, and a ton of teams have disappointed. Jets, Niners, Texans. I don't know. I mean, I think the offenses did turn around, so maybe I got a mea culpa on that one, that I thought the offensive thing was going to stick, and that hasn't really happened. So I do think we're getting some good offensive performances here. I think it's the 49ers being meh after establishing themselves as like a consistently great team over the last few years, and also whenever Garoppolo was healthy, that kind of hurts, right? That they've fallen off a bit. The Packers have been really good, but I don't know. Like, I feel like there should be more hype about them, and maybe just because of the Lions and the Vikings in the same division, people are not that excited about it. Patrick Mahomes obviously having an off year is kind of unsettling. Joe Burrow being good, but then the Bengals not being good. So I don't know. I don't know if it's boring. I just think that maybe we're not getting like great performance and great team performance out of great quarterback performance as correlated as we would like in some situations. And then that's losing the prospect of like, man, we're going to have Mahomes firing on all cylinders against Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, all firing on all cylinders with, like Justin Herbert playing well. And so let's see what he can do, and Herbert's kind of like, I don't know what's going on there. So yeah, I think maybe that's it. Maybe some of these quarterbacks were disappointing a bit, some of the younger guys. And then in the NFC, I think we're starting to realize, while Detroit was the best team in the NFL, it was kind of like there were no other great teams, right? That's what I was saying in my power rankings a lot, is that we just had no dominant teams. We had these teams with great offenses, like the Ravens, where their defense was just bad. But if there was a Ravens team like last year, where they had like a great offense, and if they had the offense they had this year with the defense they had last year, boom, we'd be really, 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 really happy. Instead, we have the Chiefs with a record you'd expect from a team like that, but just not playing well, really, at all. Alex Hussey says here, would be cool to just have every team's draft board come out after the draft. A lot of guesswork going on for outsiders. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing when we try to say so-and-so is a good GM versus so-and-so is a bad GM based upon their picks. I mean, it's all kind of silly, because like they could have had guys much higher on their draft boards who just weren't available because they were drafted by someone else who they would have taken, who ended up busts. But then the guys they did take were good. So yeah, like we can only start to get our minds around whether or not GMs are actually good or not if we could evaluate their entire draft boards every year and how good they would have been versus their actual picks. Just evaluating their picks is like beyond stupid for trying to figure out how good these guys actually are. Probably I'm gonna skip this one. Okay. Does Kirk Cousins have an NFL future in your opinion? Yeah, I mean, I think he does. I mean, I think someone can talk themselves into the fact that he's going to rehab a little bit more. Well, not rehab is maybe the wrong word, but he'll have more time to kind of settle in post Achilles. I mean, I think we see Rodgers, maybe his numbers will pick up at the end of the year post Achilles. So someone could be interested in him. I mean, hell, we had Gardner Minshew as a starting quarterback week 1 this season, right? Like whoever the equivalent of that team is next year, in a year with not great quarterbacks coming out in the NFL draft, will probably want Cousins to potentially start if he's not on the Falcons anymore. It's just that the Falcons might have to like pay off a lot of his contract. And if they don't want to pay off a lot of his contract, if they just want to, they don't want to throw good money after bad in order to get a mid-round pick, then they might have to do a post June 1st release for Cousins in order to keep their cap hit next year roughly in line with what it would have been if he stayed on the roster, and then carry over some of that to the following year. So I think he could be released rather than traded if the Falcons don't want to throw some more money at the situation. But I mean, I'm pretty sure like your median outcome for Kirk Cousins is next year will be better than the 32nd best starting quarterback in the NFL. So he should be able to find a home, I think, because of that. Dan Bodine saying we don't know basically means all the media football knowers have no value. This is a bit hyperbolic, but I think the point is true and why it won't catch on. Well, it's not saying that we don't know. Maybe that's a wrong thing to say we don't know, but everything that the media football knowers have access to, the NFL also has access to, right? And so when they're making draft picks, I'm not saying before the draft, I could throw darts at quarterback names and come up with just as good of a rank ordering as your consensus mock draft or something. That's definitely not true. But then once we have the draft, like once the draft happens, I always say the draft is grading the mocks more so than the mocks. You can now grade the draft based upon the mocks, right? Like the draft is telling us where the mocks are wrong most of the time, more so than the mocks telling us where the teams went wrong in the draft, because they got a lot more information than we do. And theoretically, every player that falls, every other team could have theoretically kind of traded up to go get them at a value price versus where the mocks would have said. Now, teams can reach. So like Penix could be a reach. Yeah, he could be a reach. Maybe there was no one else out there. But I don't know. But again, if you're the Falcons, you love him. It's really hard for you to say, yeah, but these are the reasons why we love him, but we don't think anyone else will love him. Like that's kind of a weird position to be in, right? It's like I'm getting married, and I love my beautiful fiance, but I also recognize that no one else would want to marry her. I mean, that seems weird, right? Let's see, like how do you get into that mind space, right? It's a weird place to be. It's like a theoretical thing on the outside that we can do a lot better than you can actually do on the inside when you're making these decisions. Rad Milk here, one of two. Feels like collective amnesia about overpaying quarterbacks when I hear the Vikings should re-sign Sam Darnold take. Am I missing something? I don't know if it's collective amnesia. I mean, the re-signing Sam Darnold thing, the reason that I would be for it is a little bit of the reverse of what we're talking about here, where you're not re-signing him for the upside component that you're getting from a draft pick, but McCarthy could stink. And if you have a roster, which obviously you're proving this year, that if you get good quarterback play from Sam Darnold can have a great season, then maybe you would want to bring him back. The problem is, like, what is that cost going to be? And I also think you have to recognize that this is probably like the, top fifth percentile for outcomes for Sam Darnold. So hitting on that again is like another 1 out of 20 chance. It's rolling a 20-sided die twice in a row and getting the same number. Good luck on that one. So I don't know, but we'll see. It depends on how much other teams are sold on him. Plus, you have to think about the compensation that you might get back in the form of a compensatory pick, those sorts of things. So yeah. I don't know. Again, I'm open to lots of different ways of thinking about it, because again, we're thinking about it probabilistically, right? So there's a lot of trade-offs involved in this. So I wouldn't close out anything, any particular option in this. But it's never as simple as bring back Sam Darnold because you're going to do this again that you did this season. Probably not the case. You probably like your baseline assumption is worse than what it is this season, and that should be baked into how you think about it. Another 2 of 2 here. Are there statistical indicators that we can expect Darnold to play like this? I mean, I kind of went over it. No, I don't think so. I mean, I still think there's enough of a history there where this looks like kind of the upside case for him, which looks really good according to my adjusted numbers. I mean, he's in the top 5 according to my adjusted numbers, but I still think those adjusted numbers probably don't account enough for the fact that certain quarterbacks make big mistakes, like a Jameis Winston pick 6 machine type of mistakes, where it's not just all bad luck versus expectation that some of these turnovers end up being catastrophic rather than just normal turnovers. So I don't know, but he's playing. I mean, I'm definitely moving up my assumptions for how well he would play going forward. My range of outcomes versus what I had going into this season, which were pretty bad. And last question here. I got a triple Darnold question here. Are there statistical indicators that we can expect Darnold to play like this going forward? Do we think teams will value him adequately in the offseason, or can we expect someone to overpay? I really don't know. And I think what we have to, and this goes into like even the Penix and will he be available at pick number 8? Or, will Kirk Cousins, will they be able to trade Kirk Cousins in the offseason? And sometimes even where quarterbacks will be drafted, right? Like if Bo Nix would have gone 12th overall, or if he would have slid into the second round. A lot of this, I say the musical chairs. I use the musical chairs analogy when it comes to quarterbacks. Because again, teams often and fans often view them as you have them or you don't. And if you have them, then getting a second good option that has a range of outcomes that's pretty high is totally devalued, right? Like you totally devalue bringing that in, even though you shouldn't, right? Like there should be more of a competitive marketplace for quarterbacks, but instead it's like you have the franchise quarterback, or you have a franchise adjacent quarterback, you pay him $60 million a year, or you have a mid-tier quarterback, you pay him, $35 million a year, $40 million a year, and so on. Or in this draft, you have all these guys go in the top 12 picks, and then you wait until the 5th round to go get Spencer Rattler, because it's a musical chairs thing where like you fill the chairs at all these different 32 chairs for these different teams for starting quarterbacks. And then suddenly everyone becomes devalued after that, right? It's like Baker Mayfield when he was leaving the Browns. It's like suddenly he had no value because everyone had their spots filled for him and there was nowhere for him to go, other than maybe 1 or 2 teams that have leverage in this situation. If there's no one bidding against them, they have leverage. So I kind of just don't know. At this point in time right now, where the teams are going to be. I think they're going to be open spots, and I think those, as long as you have 2 bidders, that's all you need. You only need 2 bidders, right? As long as there are 2 bidders for Darnold, I think he'll get a healthy amount, but it's probably like a Geno Smith-ish sort of deal. Something that's like a glorified 2-year contract, I think will be the case for him. I don't know, but I think will be the case. Is that an overpay or not? It probably is in a vacuum, but what I would say is you're only truly overpaying if it's preventing you from also looking at other options, which could bolster your probability of getting that elite quarterback, right? It's almost like the actual money doesn't matter that much at quarterback because of the value that you got there. Doesn't matter as much as you might think, at least. At quarterback, it only matters if it's preventing you from making the decision to try and maximize the odds of getting that elite quarterback. That's how I would look at it. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're over an hour now, so I'm going to peace out of here. Hopefully you enjoyed this discussion. Enjoy week 16. I'm sure there'll be more talk. We'll see how Penix's 1 week of football determines the future for his entire career. MVP talk, I'm sure, will be all over the place. But otherwise, I enjoy these discussions, enjoy the questions from everyone out there, and I'll be talking at you again next week. Thanks so much.